if the cat comes and jumps on the keyboard or anything happens, we can always go back and start again. If it's not good, we'll do it again. That'll be
All
easy.
right.
Gigi Langer is a presenter, retreat leader, and author of the award-winning book, 50 Ways to Worry Less Now. Reject negative thinking to find peace, clarity, and connection. Gigi is also a woman in successful long-term recovery with over 35 years of sobriety. Gigi Langer, thank you for joining us in Conversation With.
I'm so glad to be here, Kevin. Thanks.
Me too. It's a lot of fun. Two people with 35 years. Who would have thunk it?
I know. We're the lucky ones.
We are. Gigi, could you read a section of your book for us?
Sure. This is the section Kevin picked. Okay. One day, I told a friend that I had just seen a TV program about date rape and that I was so grateful nothing like that had ever happened to me. At that exact moment, I felt a queasy lurch deep in my stomach as I realized something like that had happened to me. After the initial shock wore off, it occurred to me that with all the chaos in our home, who knew what might have occurred? The next day, I found a new therapist who specialized in sexual abuse. After a few sessions, Sharon asked me to recall the first time a sexual boundary had been crossed. At first, I couldn't remember anything. Denial is difficult to crack. But later that week, I wrote this poem. I've asked Dad to awaken me, to go riding in the misty dawn. As I slowly rise to the surface, his touch comes out of the fog. Was that a hand on my breast? But he's already gone. This memory opened a deep well of dark and scary feelings. Although I was determined to heal, I wasn't sure I could do it. Once again, I stepped up my growth practices to access love's healing power and was soon led to just the right resources. Laura Davis's The Courage to Heal suggests that since memories of sexual abuse are often clothed in mystery, it isn't necessary to uncover every detail or instance. Instead of worrying about the exact form of my abuse, my focus needed to be accepting and then healing my emotions. Those failing past abuse or neglect will find it important to treat themselves with respect, loving care, and kindness.
Thank you, Gigi. And that's such a brave passage to read aloud. And Gigi's right. I'm the one who chose it. And anyone who else has ever been interviewed on In Conversation With knows I usually surprise them at the last hour and say, "Would you please read something?" But I don't really want to surprise at the last hour. There's something that called to me there, and mostly it was the poem and the courage it took to even explore that area, because to fathom that for someone who has never gone through it is difficult at best. And mostly the word denial comes in. People that have experienced it, like yourself or myself, there's a deep denial. But I think there's a denial that people who have not experienced it and don't want to think about it also really have to grapple with. And it would be helpful, I think, for you to share, how has you exposing these areas of your life publicly, how has that changed maybe your relationships with the people in your world?
Hmm. Well, I certainly didn't write, that's in chapter 5. I certainly didn't write chapter 5 without much gnashing of the teeth, worry. Some of the growth tools that are numbered in there that I used, I brought them on board because of my trying to write chapter 5 and tell that story and how much to include. And I needed to contact my family members and find out if it was okay with them to disclose some of this information. My father had already passed. Um, it's interesting. I don't find a lot of people talking to me about that specific part in terms of their own experiences. What I do hear is, oh my God, you were so honest. Where did the courage come from? But in that chapter, I share how when we're on a growth path and we have a power greater than our fearful selves to help us along that growth path. And we're joining with others to grow away from whatever has been screwing up our lives. When we're on that growth path, we tend to, at least in my experience, um, not everything that I was afraid of that I had deep down inside came gushing out all at once when I first went to therapy or when I first went to, in my case, 12-step meetings. There was a gradual, beautiful appearance of each layer that needed to heal. And that was the third layer that didn't come up till 3 or 4 years in a recovery pathway. So I'm so glad that it didn't come up at first because I don't think I could have handled it.
You're right. There's you and I, and it's why I reeled you in and said, "Would you please come on?" And to our audience, Gigi and I are not old friends, but we've both been sober and working a 12-step program for over 35 years, and we're coming up on some anniversaries and all that good stuff. But we have some parallels in our story, and that is that I had some of those similar experiences. Gigi's reading my book now, so she knows some of the things that I've gone through. Early on, when I was 9 years old, there was abuse, there was sexual abuse, and the alcoholism came into play. And of course, at birth, I was adopted, and the abandonment issues that arise around that. And you're exactly right. My same path, the same path that you had was similar to mine. I
Oh,
got sober first, and it took me at least a couple of years to say, gee, what else is going on here? Like I still don't feel right. Something's broken. And the child sexual abuse was the second piece that I slowly began to look at, almost with a little bit of a cocked head, like, what's that over there? And third of all, much later, was the adoption. So it's almost like the reverse order of what happened in my life is how I started to address them. Just incredible.
beautifully. Yeah, beautifully stated. That's right.
And of course, I didn't notice any of that until years go by and you realize, gee, I was getting ready. And there was this wonderful way that you just described that. And in your writing, you do, which is, I'm guided. I am guided. And trusting that guided process, whatever that means to someone, whether it's a higher power or God or the universe or just, good orderly direction, as we say, to learn to trust that and realize that I don't have to be ready for what's coming tomorrow. Let me be present today and find out what I need to grapple with now. Can you share a little bit about that? Because I know that's all of what your book is about.
Yeah, I was on an airplane coming back from visiting my mother after about 20 years sober, and I was so grateful that I could approach her with uh, no closing of my heart, just completely open hearted and be present and available and helpful to her. And that was after a lot of healing. And so I thought, geez, we learn all these great things in 12-step programs. I wonder how I could share some of this and everything else I've learned with people who aren't in 12-step programs. Could I distill out an essence? And so I came up with the 4 life strategies, which, being honest, out of denial, is the first one. But then I had to put in this power aspect, that there has to be a power that I find somewhere, somehow, that's bigger than my own fear, that can conquer my own fear, that can give me the courage and to give me some intuitive direction. And, that's, thank God, when I came into 12-step rooms, I mean, I had tried to become a Christian a couple of times and I couldn't buy it. I just couldn't. And someone took me to, once I was in recovery, someone took me to a unity church. It's not Unitarian, it's unity. And they are very recovery friendly. And the minister for that one was a guy named Jack Boland, who was in the Detroit area where I got sober. And he was the first person I could listen to where my bullshit detector did not go off. I mean, even in my very first 12-step meetings, when they said the Lord's Prayer, I cringed, so, but the way he explained things, and then Marianne Williamson also, and other spiritual teachers, I started getting the idea that it didn't have to be some abstract concept outside of me. It could be my higher self, my true self. Deepak Chopra often talks about the true self and the Buddhists and so on. So I didn't have to define it in any one location. But the thing that clinched it was after the therapist I went to for the sexual abuse work, after a few years of working together, she sent me to an energy healing person. And she said, we have done, all the cognitive work we can and emotional work, but the idea of accepting love from a source bigger than you, from a God figure, is, I think, where you need to go next. And it can be a female God figure, it can be a loving, any biggie loving figure. And she did a guided meditation with me, and I felt that, and I cried. And um, so that, to me, that's where we ultimately grow to. Now when I'm feeling scared or upset, or there's a challenge coming, which there are, um, after I go through the shock and awe and anger and resentment and, the first phases of why me, all that stuff, because we all are human, right? But then I get through that initial phase and start getting the second look at it, from a bigger perspective. And I start using the tools. And that's why I wrote the book. When life scares the hell out of us, what can we do? That's why I wrote it.
There's a reflection I have when I was early in recovery and I realized I didn't trust anyone, especially men, and because of what had happened to me. And I didn't trust myself, and I also didn't have a higher power that I trusted or even knew at that point.
Right.
And what I started to recognize was my resistance to having a higher power in my life was twofold. There was a part of it that was based on I don't trust that higher power. I don't trust people. I don't trust the world. I've been hurt a lot.
Sure.
There was another piece, though, that I had to finally really grapple with, and that was a sense of unworthiness. And more of that onion got peeled when I started working with my 12-step sponsor. That was where it really started. The rubber hit the road there. It wasn't a lot of fun at first, but I had to start to, I should say, instead of but, and I had to start to realize that that was going to hurt short term, but the benefits long term, maybe I couldn't see them right now, but I had to trust that they would be there because I saw them in him. I saw my sponsor with a sense of peace and contentment. And that was really the word that confused me the most. He seemed content. What are you talking about?
Yes.
We shouldn't be content. We should be discontent. But a lot of what I saw that he had grappled with and continues to, we all do over time, is that sense of unworthiness, not being worthy of a place in this world, not being worthy of friends and people who love us and family. And mostly the big one is why would any higher power want anything to do with me?
Oh, yes, absolutely. And it's I'm now running a little study group for the first time on Zoom. I limited it to 8. It turns out to be 8 women, where we're studying, the book, one chapter a week. It's a 5-week thing. And when we and one theme that goes through the book was whispered lies. I almost named it that, but I was afraid people would think it was a romance novel. Whispered lies.
You probably would have sold a lot of copies.
Right. Then they'd say, what is this book about? But every woman in that group, when we got down to the whispered lies, the negative messages that we learned to tell ourselves, which are mostly false, they named that very one, that I am not worthy. And I'm not worthy of love, and I'm not worthy of anyone's love, and I'm not worthy of God's love.
That's right.
And I remember a point in my growth where I started saying, God establishes my worth. Because I was a workaholic. I dealt with the drinking and drugs, and then I dealt with the serial crash and burn relationships and 3 divorces. And then still there was more self-will. I have to run the world and I have to convince myself I'm safe because it's an unsafe place in this world. And so I worked my ass off to be successful. I couldn't stay married long enough to have children, so I made my career, and that's where I really started realizing, because I got the stress reactions, the back pain, the neck pain, the illness, and that's when I got humble enough to say, gee, maybe this part of my life I better not be trying to manage so hard. And I guess I'm going to have to. And that co-occurred with my therapist saying that I needed to allow love in. And and that was a turning moment for me. We have to be kind of beaten up before we say, gee, maybe there's a different way.
I had to learn, like you and like many of us, that, and it's right in, I'm going to go right into our 12-step work there. It's right in 6 and 7, where it talks about humility. And it talks about humility as something that eventually, and this was a big turning point for me, I could start to recognize it would be something that I could want in and of itself, rather than something I had to be bludgeoned into. Because I hear so often, folks, I don't change for nothing. I got to be bloodied and battered. I just keep running into the brick wall until I can't, in other words, just the way I stopped drinking, just the way I stopped using drugs, just the way I stopped or changed my life. I wouldn't change until I was hardcore beaten down. As people say, many of us have to hit our own bottoms. And in recovery, I've learned that I can have a relationship with a power greater than myself. And that's
Mhm.
what the steps allowed me to manifest. And
Right.
as I got through those steps, I realized, is that the kind of higher power I want? The one that says, well, just keep running into walls until you're done and then I'll be here. No, my higher power wants me to say, why don't we do this together? Why don't you,
Ah,
why don't we walk together on this? In
mhm.
chapter 2, you talk about, and I'm going to read the name of the chapter, getting honest about your worries, and it's your strategy 1. And I love that you quoted Dostoevsky, because it's one of my favorite lunatics in the world to quote. Lying to ourselves is more deeply ingrained than lying to others, by Dostoevsky. And you started the beginning of that chapter with the question, what secrets have you been keeping from yourself? That's a very different concept, because I know that I thought I was keeping secrets from the world, but everyone knew. But there were some deep down secrets that, even if people knew, maybe they didn't want to know. We talked about that earlier, that level of denial, the sexual abuse, or just the level of degradation that I had been living. I was a prostitute on the streets. I was an addict. I was in jail. My family had to watch that and endure that and be a part of that. But I think that there are so many things that we keep secret. We try to keep secret, even from ourselves. Isn't that impossible to do?
Well, to the extent that we can get completely absorbed and hooked into a survival strategy, and for most of us, we developed it pretty early in our lives, and that was, this isn't happening. Everything's fine at home. We can use overwork, overeating, drugs, alcohol, codependency. I mean, there are so many ways we can stay away from looking at ourselves. I I just read something today. I like Richard Rohr a lot, and he was, oh, I'm not sure I can capture it. Oh, I know. He said it's really hard to look at ourselves or do any of that tough growth if we don't have a person who's loving toward us already, and not in that romantic loving way, but in that unconditional, I'm here for you, the way that's built into 12 step programs.
Yeah.
And I think that is a tough thing, because most people who are not in growth oriented groups, the groups tend to be gossip groups or drinking groups, or let's stay away from the real stuff, or let's get drunk and then talk about the real stuff. But it's not. And what you said about your sponsor was so poignant, because you I think like me too, we felt that there was a person whom we could actually trust to keep our best interest in mind and who was guided by something bigger than their own ego and fear and would stick with us and be a solid connection. And that really for me was the first solid connection to God and a higher power, because I really think first that higher power tends to show up in individual people. Some of my friends call it God in skin. And that's, when I think about it, it wasn't some abstract, big, hazy thing that I started believing in. It was what was being channeled through those people to my heart in love and care and wisdom.
The important thing when you reference my sponsor, his name is Richard. Hi, Richard.
Hi,
Shout out to
Richard.
Richard. Yeah, Gigi saying hi. Richard's in Arizona. I'm going to see him in a couple of weeks. We're flying out. So excited. So excited. Hopefully we'll launch this episode before I fly out. I have talked about this on other recordings, on other YouTube videos I've put up about meeting with Richard and getting to know Richard. In the beginning, there was a couple of things that you pointed out, and I'll hone in on them. I looked at him as someone I could trust, but there was a real key to that. One of it was that I saw that he had a sponsor, someone that he reached out to that he trusted. And that sponsor had a sponsor. In other words, we have a saying in the 12 steps, you can only keep what you have by giving it away. And I realized he wasn't giving me anything for his sake. He was giving it to me because it had already been given. And I will use the words that he used early on, because he saw how broken and how afraid I was of being unworthy, of him leaving me, of being abandoned. And he said these words. He said, Kevin, I love you and I'll never, ever leave you.
Oh,
I know. And those just broke me down to size. And I couldn't believe him, but how
right.
could I deny it? There was no denying that there was nothing in it for him. Now there's a lot more to the story of how we got to know each other and the various aspects of me learning to trust a man, trust another human being, trust someone who trusted someone else. But it's that passing along that allows me now to bring that I love you and I'll never ever leave you out from even just the sponsorship I do, the 12-step work. I can do that here on YouTube to anyone who's watching. I can do that with my children. I can do that with my neighbors. I can say that to people, even if I never use the words. In my actions, in my behavior, in my listening to them, I got you. I'm here. I'm not going anywhere.
That's so beautiful. And it's such an astonishing transformation from the self centered, manipulative, fearful, promiscuous, you know, dishonest, a person that was running my life, because that wasn't the true self of me. That's one thing I try to convey to people that I talk to and work with, that all that crap that's been running our life is the whispered lies and the self condemnation and fearful beliefs, all that negative stuff. That's I do study A Course in Miracles, which for me is a very fruitful 11th step study, but it talks about the ego, not in the psychological sense, but the fear-based self, and that's clogging the channel or clogging my heart from being open. That is not my true self. That stuff is nothing. And our true selves are so beautiful.
We are two people, and this is definitely not bragging rights. It's just a fact between us right now. Anyone who's listening or watching this, you're listening to two people combined who have 70 years of sobriety. And you're maybe wondering, gee, how do I get there? What's in it for me? How's this going to manifest? In your chapter, it's called Reaping the Rewards. And it's been so hard for me to feel like, gosh, I'm just destined to sow. I have to sow. But reaping the rewards, you write, if helping others is so valuable, why is it so difficult to do? You don't say impossible, and you don't say that it's aggravating. It's difficult. You go on to talk about our inherent self centeredness. Tell me more about that.
I like that you use that inherent word because it goes back to what we were talking about with the ego. In other words, part of us is based on an animal mechanism, which is programmed to try to survive by any means. And in the modern world, that fear tends to be triggered at things not like a stampede coming toward us, but just like an emotional threat triggers the same reaction. And so we end up being thinking that our physical sensations and warning signals are, especially when we grow up in a dysfunctional home, or where we have all the issues that you and I had, um, and also if we're somewhat highly sensitive, which is a whole other topic, but those things tend to then amplify the sound of the fear voices and the things that scare us. And so it's such a gift. It takes working for, but to realize that the true self, this self, is, they say you can't give love if you don't have it. You can't have love if you don't give it, a chicken egg. But really, the point is, we are all perfectly created in our essence, the truth of who we are. And that's just been covered up by the things we were afraid of. So then when we feel like we don't need anything anymore, I won't be happy if, all those whispered lies start. The only thing I need is to be honest, caring, loving, and be as uh, selfless as possible, except when I have to take care of my boundaries, for safety and so on. But that aside, I really don't have to be obsessing about being safe. I know I'm safe because I have a higher power and I have a posse of women around me. And I I'm not worried about that. And that gives me a very solid platform to give love to others because I feel complete and I want them to feel complete, you know?
Some of the rewards that you and I have experienced have been remarkable. I'm a high school dropout who couldn't spell his last name. My life has manifested into a fairly robust, productive member of society kind of dimension. You have a different kind of reward that I want to ask about. 50 Ways to Worry Less Now won the Indie Excellence Award. Congratulations.
Thank you.
To, can you tell us how you found out about that award? I'd love to hear that moment. And how did you practice what you write in the book when receiving an award like this? Because it's so easy for us to get kudos and then our heads get pretty big.
Well, it was interesting writing a book and self-publishing it because, because like you, I thought, okay, I could do it one way or the other, but let's just start down this path of getting the best book manuscript possible. Well, then you start reading about how to do that. Then you start reading about marketing. Then you start reading about, oh, I better start a website now. And then you start reading, that it, so all these recommendations for getting the the social media and all the recognition as much as you can. I followed those recommendations. I was retired, I had the time, I'd put a lot of time into the book. um, well, I what was the biggest thing for me was when I finally published it and I sent it out for reviews because I was following the directions of the websites, right? So I sent it to like the Midwest Book Review, which is highly respected. Didn't know what was going to come back. And it came back with a fabulous review. And that was the first time that I thought, oh my God, maybe this is really something good, because I hadn't, yeah, it's just hard for you to believe that it might be good in the way you intended it. It may not be great according to someone else, but and then I was coached in all these marketing things to submit it to book contests. So I did. And that was really a wonderful thing to receive that. Yeah, I was very grateful that the work had paid off and that the people who have read it, there are even several people who are not in 12-step programs at all because it's not written only for that. There's one guy who read it and it 12-stepped him. It got him into a 12-step program because he was struggling with not drinking. So it was interesting, the reactions. That to me is a bigger gift
That's right.
than any kind of an award.
And we have a phrase in the 12-step groups, in the rooms, as we call them, check your ego at the door.
Yes.
And when you write a book like you have, and you check your ego at the door, there's a real understanding that you're not doing this. You're not in charge of how this is going to help people. You're not, you can do all these steps and do all these things and submit to all these places and get the nice respect that you may be hoped for. But the real deal is, why did I write this? To help other people. And I don't have control over where this lands. And it's beautiful to know that people like you have read my book. And as Gigi was reading my book, all of a sudden I'm getting these emails, Kevin, I love this. And she's quoting my book. And if you're a writer, you understand that those are moments that you really hold on to.
Oh yeah.
And yet you gotta let go,
Yeah.
because that's not why we're doing it. I have that level of gratitude. I'm going to quote something for you, and then you're going to respond with the depth of meaning that this quote has. And I'm
Okay.
reading from something that Gigi wrote recently on May 12th, 2021. Here's what they say at Texas meetings. My ego is not my amigo. Hilarious and so true. That's a Twitter post that I found, which I loved. My ego, and I'm sorry for anyone from Texas. I know I just butchered the accent. My ego is not my amigo. My ego is not my friend. Is it my enemy?
Oh, that's a great question. Um, I don't think the ego has the fearful self. I don't think it has the power to be the enemy unless we turn toward it and choose to listen to it. It's, for me, the greatest revelation of my whole recovery is that I can choose what my brain focuses on. And what I choose has a huge difference in how I feel and how everybody else feels. So that way, okay, the ego is a voice I hear, but it isn't the truth. And I can choose to tune into the truth place of myself, which is my higher self, my higher power. So I try not to give the ego too much power. I have to recognize that it's trying to get power, but it's not nowhere near my higher power's power to make me happy and other people happy.
Gigi Langer is a presenter, retreat leader, and author of the award-winning book, 50 Ways to Worry Less Now, Reject Negative Thinking to Find Peace, Clarity, and Connection. Gigi is also a woman in successful long-term recovery with over 35 years of sobriety. Gigi, it's been such a pleasure. Thank you for joining me today in Conversation With.
Thank you so much, Kevin. It's been wonderful.
I'll come down and meet you in Florida soon. How's that?
I hope so.
And you're welcome here in New York anytime.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks, Gigi. Take care.
All right.